She was a black single mother rushing home with her sick baby when she heard crying in the cold. At a nearly empty bus stop, two elderly white strangers were shaking, abandoned and terrified. Everyone else had passed them by. She almost did too. Helping them meant risking the last money she had, risking her job and risking judgment in a world that already questioned her every move. One choice, one stop. What she uncovered that night exposed betrayal, racism, and a truth no one was prepared for. But the question is, why were they really left there? And what would it cost her to help? Comment and tell us where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories reach. And subscribe for more powerful stories that demand to be heard. Sophia Williams had learned to live by routines. Wake up before sunrise, get Ethan ready, rush through work, and make it home before the day could demand anything else from her. As a black single mother, her life left no room for detours. Every decision carried weight, every mistake felt amplified. People watched her more closely than they ever said out loud. That evening felt heavier than usual. Ethan Williams slept against her chest, warm and restless, his small breaths uneven. Sophia checked the time, then the street, then her phone again. The bus stop sat at the edge of town, poorly lit and nearly empty, the kind of place where time slowed and attention sharpened. She told herself she just needed to get home. Nothing more. Sophia Williams was used to being careful. She knew how quickly a black woman's intentions could be questioned, especially when she was alone. She had felt it at work, felt it on public transit, felt it even from people who claimed to care about her well-being. Sharon had reminded her of that often, how fragile her balance was, how easily everything could fall apart. The cold settled deeper as minutes passed. The streetlight above flickered, casting long shadows across the bench nearby. That's when Sophia noticed movement. Two figures sat close together, barely shifting, as if conserving what little warmth they had left. The man's shoulders were hunched. The woman leaned into him, trembling. Arthur Thompson and Evelyn Thompson didn't look lost at first glance. They looked abandoned. Sophia hesitated. This was the moment where people usually looked away. She had seen it before, how discomfort made strangers invisible. She thought of Sharon again, of warnings, of consequences, of how helping the wrong people at the wrong time could turn into blame. She didn't know that the couple's son, Ryan Thompson, had promised them safety and vanished. She didn't know that paperwork and lies had already stripped them of everything they owned. All she knew was that no one else had stopped. Sophia Williams shifted Ethan and stood still, torn between instinct and survival. Somewhere deep inside, she felt the quiet pull of responsibility, the kind that never announced itself loudly, but never let go either. She didn't realize yet that this pause would put her under scrutiny from people like Catherine Miller, or pull legal forces into her life through someone like David. She didn't know that compassion would soon be treated as suspicion. All she knew was that two elderly people were sitting in the cold, and the world had decided they were someone else's problem. In a place where being black already meant being judged, Sophia made a choice that would soon test how much judgment she could endure, and how far she was willing to go to do what felt right. Sophia told herself she would only ask one question, just enough to ease her conscience before turning back to her own struggle. But the closer she stepped, the more obvious it became that this wasn't a brief inconvenience. It was neglect. The elderly man's hands were stiff from the cold, his knuckles pale. The woman pressed against him, her breathing shallow, as if she feared that separating even for a second might make everything fall apart. "We're fine," the woman said quickly, forcing a small smile. "We're just waiting." Waiting for what, Sophia wondered as she glanced down the empty road. No buses, no headlights, no sign that anyone was coming back. Bit by bit the truth surfaced. They had been dropped off hours earlier. Their ride never returned. The phone they carried didn't work. They didn't know who else to call. Arthur Thompson tried to sound calm, but his eyes kept drifting toward the darkness, searching for answers that weren't there. Sophia felt the familiar tightening in her chest. She had seen this kind of abandonment before, Not always this obvious, not always this cruel, but just as final. She thought about Ethan Williams, still warm against her chest. She thought about the few dollars left in her account. Helping meant risk. Walking away meant living with it. She ordered the ride. Inside the car, silence filled the space between them. Evelyn Thompson kept her hands folded in her lap, as if afraid to touch anything she didn't own. When the driver slowed near a quiet neighborhood and circled the same street twice, confusion turned into fear. The address didn't exist. The house they described wasn't there. That was when the name surfaced, Ryan Thompson. Their son had handled everything: the house, the money, the paperwork. He had promised them security and disappeared with it. Sophia didn't need documents to recognize fraud. The stillness in the car said enough. At her apartment, the couple hesitated, apologizing over and over as if kindness required repayment. Morning came too quickly. Sharon arrived without warning, her expression hardening the moment she saw unfamiliar faces sitting quietly in the living room. "What is this?" Sharon asked, her voice low and sharp. Sophia tried to explain, but explanations didn't matter. What Sharon saw wasn't compassion, it was danger. A black woman already stretched thin, taking on more than she could handle. "You can't save everyone," Sharon said. "You already have a child depending on you." The ultimatum followed, heavy and final. When the door closed behind Sharon, the apartment felt smaller. Arthur and Evelyn stood immediately, gathering their things, apologizing for being a burden they never meant to become. "Please," Evelyn said softly, "we'll go." "Sit down," Sophia said, surprising herself. That choice changed everything. She called David for help. He listened carefully, then said the words that shifted the situation from moral crisis to legal threat: elder abuse, fraud. What followed was paperwork, phone calls, and the sudden realization that doing the right thing had put her under scrutiny. Days later, Catherine Miller arrived with a clipboard and a polite smile that never reached her eyes. The questions came fast: who watched them during the day, who paid the bills, whether Sophia was qualified to take responsibility. Each question carried an implication. You are not enough. Sophia felt it clearly then. The concern wasn't just about safety, it was about control. A black woman offering help was treated as a problem to be investigated, not a solution to be trusted. By the time Catherine left, the message was clear. This wouldn't stay simple. Helping had placed a target on Sophia's back. That night, Sophia lay awake listening to the apartment breathe around her. Ethan slept peacefully for the first time in days. Arthur and Evelyn whispered quietly in the spare room, unsure of what tomorrow might bring. Sophia stared at the ceiling, understanding the truth she could no longer ignore. Stopping at that bus stop hadn't just exposed a family's betrayal. It had pulled her into a system ready to decide whether compassion from someone like her was acceptable or punishable. The room felt tighter the moment Sophia Williams stepped inside. Not smaller, heavier. Every sound seemed sharper, every glance more deliberate. She was acutely aware of how she looked to everyone watching. A black single mother standing between authority and two elderly white people whose lives had already been stripped bare. Arthur and Evelyn sat close together behind her, their hands linked. They had lived long enough to recognize when judgment arrived before evidence. Sophia could feel it too, the quiet assumption that something about this situation didn't sit right because she was at the center of it. Catherine Miller spoke calmly, professionally, as if concern alone explained the scrutiny. Questions followed in neat, practiced order. Could Sophia provide long-term stability? Was she financially equipped? Did she understand the responsibility she had taken on? Each question sounded reasonable on the surface. Together, they formed an accusation. David sat beside her, steady but alert. He knew what was happening. The facts of Ryan Thompson's betrayal were clear, yet the focus kept drifting back to Sophia, her choices, her judgment, her right to step in at all. When Sophia was asked to speak, the silence felt familiar. It was the same silence she had known in offices, in meetings, in moments where she had to justify her presence before being heard. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't defend herself emotionally. She spoke plainly. She described the bus stop. The cold. Two people left behind with no working phone and no plan to get home. She talked about stopping when everyone else kept walking, about bringing Arthur Thompson and Evelyn into her home not as charity, but as human beings who deserved safety. Then Arthur stood. Age showed in his posture but not in his voice. He spoke about working his whole life, about trusting his son, about losing everything without warning. He didn't talk about money first. He talked about dignity, about how losing it hurt more than any financial loss, and how Sophia had given it back simply by treating them like people. Evelyn followed, her words slower but unwavering. She spoke about waking up each morning with purpose again, about helping care for Ethan, about being useful instead of invisible, about how fear had finally loosened its grip. Something shifted. For the first time, the room wasn't listening out of obligation. It was listening because it had to. The ruling came quietly without ceremony. Guardianship would remain with Sophia Williams. Evelyn's breath broke. Arthur closed his eyes just for a moment, as if releasing weeks of tension he hadn't known how to name. Sophia didn't smile. She sat still, understanding exactly what had just happened. This wasn't just a legal decision. It was a rare moment where compassion from a black woman wasn't treated as a threat, but as something valid, necessary, human. And as Sophia walked out of that room, she realized the truth she would never forget. She hadn't just protected two lives. She had forced a system to confront its own bias, and for once, it didn't look away. The days that followed didn't suddenly become easy, but they became steadier. The fear that once sat heavy in the apartment began to loosen its grip. Arthur moved through the space with quiet purpose again, fixing small things that had been broken for months. Evelyn found comfort in routine, morning tea, folded blankets, soft humming while holding Ethan. The home no longer felt temporary or fragile. It felt lived in. Sophia returned to work carrying more than exhaustion. She carried awareness. She understood now how quickly compassion could be questioned when it came from someone society didn't fully trust. Helping hadn't earned her praise, it had earned her scrutiny. And yet, she didn't regret a single moment. The system stepped back, but it didn't reflect. No one apologized for the assumptions, the pressure, or the quiet message that she had been expected to fail. What happened to her wasn't rare. It was familiar to countless black women who stepped forward to help, only to be asked why they dared to do so in the first place. Arthur and Evelyn found something they thought they had lost forever: dignity. Not through money or institutions, but through being treated as people again. They weren't problems to be managed. They weren't burdens. They mattered. And in that space, they gave back in ways no paperwork could measure. Ethan, too young to understand any of it, grew up surrounded by proof. Proof that family can be chosen. Proof that care doesn't require permission. Proof that justice doesn't arrive on its own. It shows up when someone refuses to walk past suffering. Sophia Williams never saw herself as a hero. She saw herself as someone who stopped when the world told her not to. Someone who chose humanity over comfort. Someone who accepted that doing the right thing might come with consequences and decided to do it anyway. That night at the bus stop could have ended differently. She could have looked away, protected herself, stayed silent, but she didn't. And because of that choice, 3 lives were changed, and a system was forced, even briefly, to confront its own bias. So the question remains, long after the moment has passed, when you see injustice, especially when helping comes at a cost, will you keep walking or will you stop? If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to Black Community Struggles for more powerful stories about justice, truth, and our community's fight to be seen. And don't forget to hit the like button. Your support helps these stories reach the people who need them most.